Welcome to Scary Stories, the channel that tells you scary stories.
Welcome to Scary Stories NYC. I'm your old pal Bigfoot. We've got two all-new scary Dogman stories today. One called The Aging Dogman, and the other, which I like to call the Wappanocca Avenue Werewolf. Dear Scary Stories NYC, here's a Dogman story that took place in the early 1990s up in Rye, New York. Yes, the same place where Rye Playland is located, that big amusement park. I was there with some of my buddies, riding the rides and having a great time. Then I met a girl there. We hit it off right away, and it turned out she was a local. I split off from my friends and walked her home, which I guess was an hour or two away walking. Of course, we took the scenic route, taking our time and getting to know each other. Eventually, she said she needed to get home before her parents got mad, so we walked toward her house a little more seriously. When we got to the corner of Natoma Street and Wappanocca Avenue, something incredibly weird happened, and that's why I'm sending you this story. Okay, we're walking down Natoma Street and it ends at Wappanocca. It forms a sort of a T shape. It ends up in a wall with trees and bushes behind it. Peering out at us from that foliage as we walk down Natoma Street were two bright yellow lights, or maybe two bright yellow eyes. I grew more curious as we approached the corner, but the girl didn't seem to notice. Once on the corner across the street from those yellow lights, she wanted to go right, but I stopped her, nodded toward the yellow lights. She wasn't interested, so I had to point at them, and when I did, I saw them blink. I gasped and took a step back. Those are eyes, I told her. I was a city boy, and I think that was the first time I had noticed eye shine in my life. I've lived with cats since then, so I've seen it a lot in the years after this happened, but back then I was stunned that eyes of an animal could reflect light like that. The next thing that happened was that we both heard growling, and we both shut up. Whatever was in those trees was glaring at us and growling at us. It sounded like a dog, but also not like a dog. I flashed on what I had been told about real-life werewolves, not dogmen. I mean, the cases where men think they're transformed into wolves and they actually do terrible things when they think they're in the wolf state. I was equally afraid that there was a large, possibly rabid dog in those bushes, as I was afraid that there was an insane dude who thought he was a werewolf in there. Either way, we were in trouble. Both of us made a huge mistake in that we backed up a few feet onto Natoma. We needed to go forward and to the right down Wappanocca, and that's the way we should have gone. But we backed up, and that placed us in greater danger than before when the owner of those two yellow eyes emerged from the woods and put his hands on top of the stone fence separating us. Yes, I said hands, and yet I do not think that we were looking at a man. This was some kind of a monster. It was a dog, all right, but then again, it wasn't. The hands were not like normal human hands. they were entirely covered in hair or fur, and each finger ended in a long, cat-like claw. Now we needed to go forward a few steps to get back to Wapponacca Avenue, but that would mean taking steps toward an angry, hairy, unknown animal, which it might perceive as a threatening move. Both our minds were spinning in circles, and the girl had decided that this was someone putting us on. "You're not funny," she shouted. "Stop trying to scare us with your stupid Bigfoot costume," she continued. "It doesn't even look real." While shouting at him, she had caught his glance, and I guess it must have confused him because the growling stopped. She had marched forward while lecturing him like a mother scolding her child. I walked up behind her, and now we were both far enough forward that we could head down Wappanocca if we wanted to. I knew I wanted to, so I tugged on her shoulder and made motions that we should head down the street. She seemed to be too into her lecturing mom high horse head trip to stop, which automatically made me decide I was not going to see this girl again. She apparently loved drama and felt she had a right to lecture total strangers. Not a good sign in terms of developing a personal relationship. The hairy Dogman was no longer surprised at what she was doing. Now he narrowed his eyes, and to me, it looked like he was about to pounce. The girl was not in the present moment with me and that large upright dog. She was in her head to such a degree that I had never seen before. Of course, these days, you see it everywhere you look. People in their fantasy worlds on social media lecturing everyone. People blocking sidewalks to stare dumbly at their cell phones. And so on. You can name examples of your own. But back then, most people actually participated in life directly and were aware enough to understand that when a hairy, predatory animal is about to pounce on you, that you might want to shut up for a second and place your personal safety in front of your massive ego. I nudged the girl a little harder to break her from her trance, and she lectured me. The good thing about that was it meant she broke her eye contact with the beast to glare at me instead, and that seemed to calm the animal down a bit. I suggested we leave, but she talked over me, lecturing me with this weird smirk on her face, so certain of her superiority. I was amazed someone could have gotten so old at such a young age. I wondered if she came from a long line of snotty know-it-alls, or if she was the rebel in her family. I didn't get to wonder about it for long, as that monster decided to come over the fence and get a closer look at us. The growling returned, and Miss Superior 1992 actually shut up when she turned to see that thing climbing over the fence and standing full-bodied on the sidewalk across the street from us. This was not a guy in a costume. This was not a crazy person who thought he was a werewolf. And this was also not a stray dog. This was something neither of us had ever seen before, and something that was not supposed to exist. It had a dog-like face, but its mouth was more like a long cat snout. By that I mean, the teeth were longer and scarier looking than most dogs' teeth. It was like some kind of a prehistoric dog, maybe. The hair was all over the place, not close-cropped and neat like most dogs' fur is. Maybe it was hair and not fur, as it seemed tangled in some places and fly away in other places. It gave the impression of a crazy person, but also of something wild from the caveman times. I don't know if that description makes any sense at all, but that's the best I can do for the most part. The thing that shut the girl up and really put a chill of fear through me was that the thing had legs which were not human. I guess you could say that they looked like the hind legs of a dog, but that's not entirely true. They looked more like the hind legs of a dog than anything else, but they were different too. They were too thick to be a dog's legs, and the feet were like a mix between those of a dog and those of a human. They were flatter on the bottom than a dog's feet and larger. This thing was used to walking upright, and yet it was not human. I grabbed her hand and dragged her away. She resisted and shouted for me to stop pulling her. I asked her where she lived. She wouldn't tell me. I told her I was trying to get her home safely and I needed to know where she lived. She stuttered out an address and I dragged her to her home, then rang the doorbell to deliver her personally to her parents. I looked behind, and the creature was no longer anywhere to be seen. I imagined he had gone back into the woods beyond the stone fence. Needless to say, both her parents were somewhat concerned with what exactly was going on. The girl started crying that we had been bothered by a guy in a werewolf costume, but I looked the father straight in the eye, and I told him it was some kind of an animal. He seemed to know already about how hysterical his daughter was, and he looked me back in the eye and told me there was a stream just beyond that fence, and that even though this area was very suburban, sometimes wild animals followed the water down into the neighborhood. He had no doubt I was telling the truth, and he told his wife and daughter to get inside. Then he told me he was going to drive me home, but I told him I lived in the city. He drove me to the bus station instead, and we talked along the way. That stream, it turns out, is called Blind Brook. The local school district and several other things around there were named after it. When we got to the bus station, he stopped me from leaving the car and told me that he had seen something once by that brook that he thought was a Sasquatch. I looked him in the eye and told him I absolutely believed him, and that was because I absolutely believed him. We sit in our modern homes with our modern conveniences, thinking we understand everything and that we're so in control of the world around us. But out there, lurking in the night, are things we will never and can never comprehend. Because out there in the night lurks the Dogman. Don't go away, we'll be right back with the aging Dogman right after this.
Do you have a scary story you want us to read on the show? Just call our voicemail hotline, 804-LIST-SCARY. That's 804-537-2279. And now for something completely scary.
The aging Dogman. Dear Scary Stories, I want to tell you a story about seeing Dogman not once, but 3 times. The beginning seems like a logical place to start, so let's do that. When I was a kid, my family had a picnic in some field somewhere. I remember us being alone in the field with a forest off in the distance, and I remember the sun beating down on us. I was very young, maybe 3 or 4 or 5. I wanted to go inside, or at least under some cover, because I didn't like the hot sun. But my mother told me we were there specifically to get some sun, so I had to endure it. I was miserable, but I tried to make the best of it so that my father didn't scream at me, and I wandered around on the grass looking for bugs or worms to fill up the time until we could finally go back inside the air-conditioned car and get back to civilization. Eventually, I got kind of dizzy and dehydrated and had to sit down on the grass. That's when I noticed a very funny, wolf-headed man in the trees looking out at me. He waved his monster hand at me, and that made me laugh. I waved back, and soon I was laughing hysterically like only a young kid could do. My mother came and picked me up, and we left. That's about all I can remember about that. I remember when I was getting ready to go off to college years later, I brought up that memory to my mother, asking her if she remembered where we were that day. She said she vaguely remembered, but she thought they had put up a supermarket parking lot where that field used to be. She said I'd gotten sick after that trip, so we never went back there again. I've always been far more sensitive to sunlight than the rest of my family for some reason, so after hearing this, I assumed that I was hallucinating when I saw the Dogman smiling and waving at me. It was a lot easier to believe than thinking it was real. Even so, I felt compelled to return to the area before moving away to college, and so I did. I offered to do the shopping for my mother, just as an excuse to borrow her car and check out the woods behind the supermarket around the area where the original incident had taken place. I found the supermarket in question. Then I drove around as best I could to the area behind it, which was still undeveloped forest land. It took me a while to figure out how to get off the highway and onto the local roads, but eventually I did, and I found an area from which I could walk directly into the woods themselves, where my hallucinatory Dogman had once lived, at least in my imagination. I found an old fallen tree to sit on and just stopped thinking at all, immersing myself into the location, enjoying just being there. I saw some kind of a small bird land right near one of my feet as though he weren't even aware of my presence. That's how at one I was with everything around me in that moment. I saw a small rodent walk by, sniffing the ground. It was kind of a small rat or a large mouse, something I would normally have been afraid of in the city. I watched as it rose on its hind legs to reach high enough to smell a flower. And I was stunned to realize that rats have feelings too. Rats can appreciate a flower or a beautiful day just the same as we can. It nearly walked onto my foot after that, and I held still, not wanting to frighten this beautiful little creature. And then I heard a sound to my left, and I looked, and what I saw turned my blood ice cold. It was a man. A dog-headed man. If it wasn't the same one I saw when I was a kid, it was sure very similar. Only now it was larger. It was older, just as I was. I stared, unbelieving, wondering if this was what I had seen as a kid. Then, I swear to you, it smiled at me and waved its hand. I did not laugh or wave back this time, as I had when I was a kid. No, I screamed, and I ran back to my mother's car and went shopping for her. I could not wait to get under the fluorescent lights and push a shopping cart. I had seen exactly what I wanted to see, then discovered that wanting something is not as good as having it. So then, the rest of my life passed. It sped bed would probably be a better way to put it. Every day was a chore. I lived in fear and doubt. I never went anywhere near those woods, either those woods or actually any woods, ever again. Rather than satisfying my desire to understand what I'd seen as a child, the second sighting of the Dogman had caused me to close up emotionally and in most other ways as well. I spent the rest of my life wondering if I might be insane, but not wanting to really find out. I would hide at my job, hide in relationships, break up if the person started to want to get to know me too well. Although I was lucky enough to gather some loyal friends, I never felt I deserved them, and I wouldn't let them get too close. So, now, this past year when I turned 70, but nobody remembered my birthday, somehow the fear drained out of me. I guess I was just ready to go at that point. You know, ready for life to be over once and for all. I hadn't learned anything in all those years. I still lived in fear, and when I died, I knew nobody would remember me, and nobody would care. I got in the car and drove. No, not to a bridge or a tall building or anything like that, but back to that old supermarket that used to be the field where I first saw the Dogman. It was now a dollar store, and the parking lot was mostly empty. I didn't have to try hard to find the way to the local streets this time. There was very little traffic on the highway, and I could take my time reading the signs until I found the right one. Parking in the identical place I parked when I was heading to college and walking into the woods in the identical way. I wanted to go sit on that old log and enjoy the afternoon one more time. I wanted to remember what it was like to just be, not to think or do, but to just be for a while. To actually experience a moment of honest life again. Not fear, not stress, not worry. When I found that old log, I discovered it was too decayed and eaten up to sit on any longer, and I felt a bit sad. That log was just like me. We had both turned out the same way, rotten and eaten away. I stared at it, unable to be at one with my surroundings, and instead feeling deep self-pity and longing for what once was and what might have been. I heard a sound to my right and looked. It was a man, wearing white, walking through the woods. No, it wasn't a man. It was a white dog, walking upright, passing me through the forest. I called to it, "Hey!" I waved at it in vain, but it didn't look my way. It seemed much older and more feeble, but it was that same Dogman I knew it had to be. I ran into the woods after it, but immediately lost sight of it. I searched for a long time, but I guess I knew I wouldn't find it. I didn't deserve to find it. I hadn't waved back the last time. I had disrespected it, and I had disrespected life in general. After that, at the age of 70, I started seeing a shrink. I won't say I recommend the process, as I think a lot of it is mumbo-jumbo to be honest, but it was an important first step for me to begin analyzing my own life, and finally, at this late stage, coming to conclusions that I might have come back to back in my prime. My shrink thought that the Dogman was a Jungian archetype who manifested to me 3 times when I was in a state of flux. That sounds like a lot of supernatural baloney to me, but I do think there's an odd kind of truth underlying it. I don't think it was me by myself manufacturing or manifesting the Dogman. I feel strongly it was me in a coupling with the location and with life itself, all collaborating in creating something that was not real, and yet more real than anything else around it. I think that the manifestations I witnessed carry with them more meaning than any of us would ever be able to consciously discern. Meaning as old as the hills and forests that the visitations took place in. Without understanding that meaning, I still carry it with me anyway, and I share it with the aging Dogman. And now, get ready for an all-new, completely uncensored, slightly bloody, and absolutely terrifying new Dogman story. Oh wait, YouTube won't allow me to tell you stories like that on this channel. If you want to hear that, you're going to have to go to peterbernard.com and sign up for our paid subscribers club. You can choose any price you can afford for a 1-month subscription, and then every weekend we tell you a story YouTube would never allow us to tell you on this channel. See you this Sunday for an all-new, very scary, completely uncensored Dogman story.
If you enjoyed this, please click like or consider subscribing. Remember to click the bell icon or you won't get notifications. If you want to listen to Bigfoot's secret uncensored story each Sunday, just go to peterbernard.com and become a paid subscriber. See you tomorrow. Same dog time, same dog channel.
Come back for more scary stories.